The room was almost dark. Only the steady beep of the heart monitor broke the heavy silence that filled the pediatric ward of Kansas City Children's Hospital. The machines hummed quietly in the corner, their digital displays casting an eerie blue glow across the walls, decorated with colorful drawings, stuffed animals that seemed to watch over the small figure lying motionless in the hospital bed. In that bed, a little girl named Amaris Lauti slowly opened her eyes and turned her head toward the door. Her breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest requiring tremendous effort. She had been waiting for this moment for what felt like forever, though in reality it had only been 3 hours since her parents had told her the news. He was coming. The famous man she had seen on television, the one who made crowds cheer and children smile, was actually coming to see her. Not because cameras were rolling or because it was good publicity, but because somehow, through a series of phone calls and desperate pleas from her parents, he had agreed to spend a few precious minutes with a dying girl who had one simple wish. The door handle turned slowly. A tall figure stepped into the room, moving carefully, as if he understood that even the slightest noise might disturb the fragile peace that surrounded Amaris. He didn't announce himself or offer the kind of boisterous greeting that might be expected from someone of his stature. Instead, he simply stood there for a moment, 2 steps inside the doorway, taking in the sight of the small girl who had captured his attention through a heartbreaking letter her father had somehow managed to get to him. Travis Kelce had received thousands of requests over the years, letters from sick children, invitations to birthday parties, pleas from desperate parents hoping for just a moment of joy in their child's darkest hour. But something about Amaris's story had been different. Something about the way her father Simeon had written about her courage, about how she faced each day with a smile, despite knowing that her days were numbered, had touched something deep inside him. Now, standing in her hospital room, he could see why. Despite her obvious weakness, despite the tubes and wires that connected her to the machines keeping her alive, Amaris managed to lift the corners of her mouth into the most beautiful smile Travis had ever seen. It wasn't the kind of smile that asked for pity or demanded attention. It was the smile of someone who had found genuine joy in the most unlikely of circumstances. She looked at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for someone so young, and in that moment, Travis felt his heart break and soar simultaneously. This wasn't just a sick child looking for a momentary distraction from her pain. This was a brave soul who had something to teach him about what really mattered in life. Amaris opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out at first. The effort of simply staying awake was enormous, and Travis could see that every moment of consciousness was precious and fleeting. He took a step closer, then another, until he was close enough to hear whatever she might whisper. When she finally found her voice, it was barely audible above the sound of the machine. She leaned forward slightly, using what little strength she had left, and whispered something that would change everything. The request was so simple, so innocent, and yet so impossible to refuse, that Travis felt his entire world shift in that instant. It wasn't what she asked for that would haunt him. It was what she offered in return, a promise that would outlive them both. Rowena Lauti had been watching the clock on the wall for the past 2 hours, her eyes tracking the minute hand as it moved with agonizing slowness around the white face. Each tick seemed to echo through the sterile hospital room where her daughter lay sleeping, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. The afternoon light streaming through the single window had shifted from bright and hopeful to the golden amber that signaled the approach of evening, and with each passing moment, Rowena felt her anxiety growing. "Temos kins minutos bons," she whispered to her husband Simeon, who stood at the foot of their daughter's bed, his large hands gripping the metal rails so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His weathered face, marked by months of sleepless nights and endless worry, showed the strain of a man who had watched his child slip away day by day, hour by hour, with nothing he could do to stop it. Simeon nodded without taking his eyes off Amaris, who had been sleeping for the past 3 hours. The doctors had warned them that her energy would come in brief, unpredictable bursts, followed by long periods of exhaustion that seemed to pull her deeper and deeper into a place where they couldn't follow. Today was supposed to be different, though. Today was the day that might give their daughter one last moment of pure joy before the inevitable. The letter Simeon had written to Travis Kelce 3 weeks ago had been a desperate act of a father running out of options. He had heard about other athletes who visited sick children, and while he had never been the type to ask for charity or special favor, something about watching his daughter's quiet courage in the face of terminal illness had compelled him to try. The response had come faster than he had dared to hope, and now, as the appointed time approached, he found himself holding his breath. Declan Meyerwood appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the entrance as he surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone who had overseen countless difficult situations. As the head nurse of the pediatric oncology ward, Declan had seen more heartbreak than most people could imagine, but he had also witnessed moments of incredible beauty and grace that reminded him why he had chosen this profession. The way families came together in crisis, the strength that children showed in their darkest hours, and occasionally the kindness of strangers who went out of their way to bring light into the darkness. "Él está camino," Declan said softly, his voice carrying the kind of gentle authority that came from years of delivering both devastating news and unexpected hope. He stepped into the room and checked the monitors that surrounded Amaris's bed, making minor adjustments to ensure everything was functioning properly. Security called from the main entrance about 5 minutes ago. He should be here any moment. Rowena felt her heart skip a beat. After weeks of uncertainty, after days of wondering if her daughter would even be conscious when the time came, it was actually happening. Travis Kelce, one of the most recognizable athletes in the country, was coming to their daughter's hospital room because a desperate father had written a letter that somehow found its way to the right person at the right time. She looked down at Amaris, who had been motionless for hours, and whispered a silent prayer that her daughter would wake up, that somehow, despite the medication and the exhaustion and the way the illness seemed to be stealing more of her awareness each day, Amaris would be present for this moment. She deserved to have this one bright spot in what had been months of darkness. Simeon moved around the bed to stand beside his wife, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. They had been through so much together over the past year since Amaris's diagnosis, and while they had tried to remain strong for their daughter's sake, both of them were running on empty. The constant vigil, the medical appointments, the crushing weight of watching their child suffer while being powerless to help. It had taken a toll that went beyond physical exhaustion. Each beep of the heart monitor seemed to grow slower and more deliberate, as if time itself was slowing down in anticipation of what was about to happen. The room fell into the kind of hushed expectancy that precedes moments of great significance, when everyone present understands that they are about to witness something that will be remembered long after the immediate circumstances have faded. Declan moved to the window and adjusted the blind, softening the harsh afternoon light that had been streaming across Amaris's face. He had learned over the years that these visits worked best when the environment was as calm and comfortable as possible. Too much stimulation could overwhelm already fragile patients, while too little might fail to create the connection that made these encounters meaningful. The sound of footsteps in the hallway grew closer, accompanied by the quiet voices of security personnel who were escorting their important visitor through the maze of hospital corridors. Rowena squeezed Simeon's hand, both of them holding their breath as they waited for the moment that would either fulfill their daughter's dying wish or become just another disappointment in a series of hopes that had been repeatedly dashed. A soft knock on the doorframe announced the arrival they had been anticipating. All three adults turned toward the entrance, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope, anxiety, and desperate love for the small girl who had become the center of their universe. The next few minutes would determine whether this carefully orchestrated visit would bring the joy they had prayed for, or whether it would simply be another reminder of all the normal childhood experiences their daughter would never have. The doorknob turned slowly, and in that instant, every person in the room understood that they were about to witness something that would change them all forever. The question that hung unspoken in the air, the question that had been tormenting Rowena and Simeon for hours, was finally about to be answered. Had he arrived in time? Was Amaris still aware enough to understand what was happening? Would this visit be the gift they had hoped for? Or would it become just another painful reminder of everything they were losing. The door opened, and their question was about to be answered. Travis Kelce stepped into the room with the careful deliberation of someone who understood the weight of the moment he was entering. He had visited children in hospitals before, but something about this particular situation felt different from the start. Perhaps it was the way Simeon's letter had described his daughter's quiet bravery, or maybe it was the unmistakable atmosphere of gentle urgency that permeated the entire pediatric ward. Whatever it was, he found himself moving more slowly and thoughtfully than usual. He closed the door behind him with barely a whisper of sound, then stood perfectly still for several seconds, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimmed lighting and taking in the carefully arranged details of Amaris's room. Colorful drawings covered one wall, clearly the work of a child who loved bright colors and fantastical creatures. Stuffed animals of every size and description crowded the windowsill and the chair beside her bed, creating a small oasis of childhood wonder in the midst of medical equipment. And there, in the center of it all, was the smallest, most courageous person he had ever encountered. Amaris lay perfectly still beneath a soft pink blanket, her dark hair spread across the pillow like a halo. Even in sleep, there was something remarkable about her presence, something that spoke to an inner strength that far exceeded her physical fragility. Travis had met many brave people in his life, but looking at this little girl, he understood that he was in the presence of a kind of courage he had never encountered before. As if sensing his presence, Amaris began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered open slowly, and when her gaze found Travis standing near the foot of her bed, the most extraordinary thing happened. Despite her obvious weakness, despite the tubes and monitors and all the medical apparatus that surrounded her, she managed to lift the corners of her mouth into a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. It wasn't the enthusiastic reaction he might have expected from a child meeting a celebrity. Instead, it was something far more profound, a look of recognition and gratitude that suggested she understood exactly how special this moment was. Travis felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized that this little girl, who had every reason to be angry or frightened or despairing, was somehow finding joy in his simple presence. He moved closer to her bed, each step measured and deliberate. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small football that he had brought as a gift, something he thought might bring her a moment of happiness. But, as he placed it gently on the blanket beside her, he realized that the football was really just an excuse, a tangible representation of the connection he hoped to make with this remarkable child. Amaris looked at the football, then back at Travis, and her smile grew even brighter. She lifted one small hand from beneath the blanket and touched the leather surface with her fingertips, tracing the stitched lines with the careful attention of someone who understood that every sensation was precious. The gesture was so tender, so filled with wonder despite everything she was enduring, that Travis had to blink back tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft beeping of the machine. The words took tremendous effort, and Travis could see that even this simple expression of gratitude was pushing her to the limits of her strength. He wanted to tell her that she didn't need to thank him, that being here with her was a privilege he didn't deserve, but he sensed that speaking might interrupt the delicate magic of the moment. A burst of bright light from the hallway suddenly flooded the room as someone opened the door to check on them. Amaris immediately squeezed her eyes shut, her face contorting slightly with discomfort. The harsh, fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor was too much for her sensitive eyes, and Travis could see that even this small disturbance was causing her distress. Declan, who had been watching quietly from near the window, immediately stepped forward and adjusted the lighting in the room, closing the door and dimming the bedside lamp until the illumination was soft and gentle. "Better?" he asked Amaris, who nodded slightly and opened her eyes again, blinking slowly as she readjusted to the more comfortable atmosphere. Travis knelt beside her bed, bringing himself down to her eye level. He had learned over the years that children responded better when adults made themselves smaller, when they took the time to enter the child's world, rather than expecting the child to rise up to theirs. But with Amaris, he sensed that this wasn't just a matter of good technique with kids. It was about showing respect for someone who deserved every consideration he could offer. "Hi, Amaris," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth and sincerity that came from deep within his heart. "I'm Travis. I'm really Really happy to meet you." She nodded, using what little energy she had to maintain eye contact with him. There was something in her gaze that went beyond the normal interaction between a celebrity and a young fan. It was as if she was looking directly into his soul, seeing something there that even he wasn't fully aware of. The moment stretched between them, filled with a kind of communication that didn't require words. Travis could see that traditional conversation would be too taxing for her, that the effort required to form words and project her voice was more than her weakened body could sustain for long. But he also sensed that she had something she wanted to share with him, something important that she had been waiting to express. The challenge was creating space for that communication without exhausting her in the process. He reached out slowly and gently took her small hand in his much larger one, being careful not to disturb the IV line that ran from the back of her hand to the bag of fluid hanging beside her bed. Her fingers were cool and incredibly delicate, but when she squeezed his hand with what little strength she possessed, he felt a connection that was more powerful than any touchdown reception or championship victory he had ever experienced. Behind him, he could hear Rowena and Simeon moving quietly around the room, probably positioning themselves to capture this moment on camera. He understood their need to document this meeting, to have something permanent to hold on to when their daughter was no longer with them. But for now, he wanted to focus entirely on Amara, to give her his complete and undivided attention for however long she was able to stay awake and aware. The room fell into a peaceful silence that felt almost sacred. Outside in the hallway, the normal sounds of hospital life continued. Nurses checking on patients, the soft ding of elevator doors, the muted conversations of medical staff going about their duty. But inside Amaris's room, time seemed to slow down and become something precious and finite, each second stretching out like a gift that needed to be savored. Travis watched as Amaris's eyes began to flutter slightly, a sign that maintaining consciousness was becoming increasingly difficult for her. He knew that he needed to be prepared for the possibility that their visit might be brief, that her energy could fade at any moment. But he also sensed that there was something she wanted to tell him, something that was important enough to her that she was fighting to stay awake, despite her exhaustion. The question was whether there would be enough time for her to share whatever was on her heart, and whether he would be able to understand what she needed from him. The silence in the room was filled with anticipation, as if everyone present understood that they were building toward something significant, something that would give meaning to this entire extraordinary encounter. Travis remained perfectly still, holding Amaris's small hand in his, watching as she gathered what little strength she had left for something that was clearly very important to her. Her breathing had become more labored over the past few minutes, and he could see that every moment of consciousness was costing her dearly. Yet there was a determination in her eyes that told him she wasn't ready to surrender to sleep just yet. She turned her head slightly on the pillow and with tremendous effort began to speak in a whisper so soft that Travis had to lean closer to hear her words. "Travis," she said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed impossible for someone so young and frail, "I have something I want to ask you." He squeezed her hand gently, encouraging her to continue while simultaneously marveling at the courage it must be taking for her to push through her exhaustion. "I'm listening, sweetheart," he said softly. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Travis had come to the hospital thinking he would be the one offering comfort and inspiration to a sick child. He had prepared himself to be strong, to bring joy and excitement into a situation filled with sadness and fear. But as he knelt beside Amaris's bed, he realized that the roles had somehow become reversed. This little girl, who had every reason to be focused on her own suffering, was clearly thinking about something else entirely, something that involved him. "Will you?" she began, then paused to catch her breath, the effort of speaking obviously draining her limited energy. Travis waited patiently, giving her all the time she needed to form her thoughts into words. Behind him, he could sense Rowena and Simeon holding their breath, probably wondering what their daughter was about to say. "Will you write your name on the football?" she finally managed to whisper. And will you write mine too? So we're both there together?" The request was so simple, so innocent, that Travis felt his heart break and soar simultaneously. Of course he would write their names on the football. Of course, he would create this small monument to their meeting, this tangible proof that they had shared this moment together. But even as he nodded his agreement, he sensed that there was more to her request, something deeper she was building toward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the pen he always carried for autograph, then carefully lifted the football from where it rested on her blanket. "Travis and Amaris," he said, as he began to write, speaking the words aloud so she could hear how they sounded together. "That's perfect. That's exactly right." As he formed the letters of their names on the leather surface of the football, Travis noticed that Amaris was watching him with an intensity that seemed to go beyond simple interest in the autograph. There was something else happening here, something that he couldn't quite understand but could definitely feel. It was as if this moment was building toward something even more significant than he had realized. Before he could finish writing, Amaris interrupted him with another whisper. "Wait," she said. And with enormous effort, she began to move her free hand beneath the pillow beside her head. Travis paused in his writing, watching as she struggled to retrieve something that she had apparently been keeping hidden. From beneath the pillow, she pulled out a small piece of blue ribbon, the kind that might be used to wrap a gift or tie back a child's hair. It was simple and unremarkable, just a few inches of fabric in a soft azure color, but the way Amaris held it suggested that it was precious beyond measure. Her fingers trembled with the effort of keeping hold of it, but she managed to extend it toward Travis. This was from my favorite dress," she whispered, her voice growing even softer as her energy began to fade. "Mama saved it for me when I got too sick to wear it anymore. I want you to have it, but I need you to promise me something." Travis looked at the small ribbon, understanding instinctively that he was being offered something irreplaceable, something that represented not just a piece of clothing, but a connection to the healthy, happy child that Amaris had been before her illness changed everything. The trust implicit in her gesture was overwhelming, and he felt the weight of responsibility that came with being chosen to receive such a precious gift. "Tell me what you need me to promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever it is, if it's in my power to do it, I will." Amaris smiled again, that same radiant expression that seemed to transform the entire atmosphere of the room. "Promise me that you'll tie this ribbon around your wrist when you look at the picture we're going to take," she said. "And promise me that when you do, you'll remember that even when people can't be together anymore, they can still be connected by the promises they make to each other." The profundity of her request hit Travis like a physical blow. This little girl, who was facing the ultimate separation from everyone and everything she loved, was asking him to help her create a bridge across that divide. She was asking him to carry a piece of her with him into a future that she would never see, and to remember that love could transcend even death. Without hesitation, Travis took the ribbon from her trembling fingers and carefully tied it around his wrist. The blue fabric stood out against his skin like a symbol of hope in the midst of heartbreak, a tangible reminder of the extraordinary person who had chosen to share her most precious possession. "I promise," he said, and as he spoke the words, he felt them settle into his heart like a sacred vow. "I promise that I'll remember, and I promise that your spirit will live on in that memory." Amaris nodded, her eyes already beginning to close as the effort of their conversation finally overwhelmed her remaining strength. But before she drifted off, she managed one more whisper. "Now we can take the picture. Now it will mean what it's supposed to mean." Fiji. Travis carefully finished writing their names on the football, adding the words "always" beneath them as a testament to the permanent nature of the connection they had forged. Then he set the ball aside and positioned himself closer to Amaris, understanding that they were about to capture something that would be far more than just a photograph. As Rowena and Simeon moved closer with their camera, and as Declan stepped back to give them space, Travis realized that this moment had become something he never could have anticipated. What had begun as a simple visit to cheer up a sick child had transformed into an exchange of promises that would outlast both of their physical presence in the world. The blue ribbon around his wrist felt warm against his skin, a constant reminder that some connections are too powerful to be broken by circumstance, no matter how final they might seem. Simeon approached the bedside with his phone in hand, his fingers trembling slightly, as he prepared to capture what he knew would be one of the most important photographs ever taken. His wife, Rowena, moved to stand beside him, both parents understanding instinctively that they were about to document something far more significant, a simple celebrity visit. The air in the room felt charged with emotion, as if everyone present could sense that this moment would resonate far beyond the walls of the hospital. Declan positioned himself near the window, far enough away to give the family privacy, but close enough to assist if needed. As the head nurse, he had witnessed countless bedside visits over the years, but there was something different about this one, something that made him feel as though he was observing a moment of genuine grace, unfolding in real time. Travis carefully positioned himself beside Amaris's bed, acutely aware that every movement needed to be gentle and considered. She had used almost all of her remaining energy in their conversation about the ribbon, and he could see that she was fighting to stay conscious for just a few more minutes. Her breathing had become shallower, and her eyes kept fluttering as exhaustion pulled at her consciousness. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Travis asked softly, leaning down so that his face was close to hers. Amaris managed a small nod, and with what seemed like her last reserve of strength, she lifted her arms slightly in invitation for an embrace. Travis slipped his arms around her carefully, mindful of all the tubes and wires that connected her to the life-sustaining equipment. As he held her small frame against his chest, he was struck by how fragile he felt, how delicate and precious this little life was that was slowly slipping away, despite everyone's best effort to save it. But he was also amazed by the strength he could feel radiating from her, the unshakable courage that had brought them to this moment. Amaris settled into his embrace with a soft sigh of contentment, as if this was exactly where she was meant to be. She turned her head slightly so that it rested against his shoulder, and Travis could feel her breathing gradually slow and deepen as the comfort of human connection allowed her to finally relax. "Now," she whispered, so quietly that only Travis could hear her. "Take it now, while we're both here together." Simeon raised his phone, trying to frame the shot through eyes that were rapidly filling with tears. This was his daughter, his brave, beautiful daughter, creating a memory that would have to last forever. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing. The knowledge that this single image would be all he had left to show the world who Amaris really was and what she meant to everyone who loved her. Rowena reached over and placed her hand on her husband's arm, steadying him as he prepared to take the photograph. She could see that he was struggling to hold the phone steady, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were documenting. Together, they had watched their daughter face her illness with remarkable grace, but this moment represented something even more profound, a connection between two souls that transcended the ordinary boundaries of human experience. As Simeon's finger hovered over the camera button, Travis closed his eyes and pulled Amaris close, pouring all of his love and admiration for her courage into that embrace. He wanted her to feel in those precious seconds how much her bravery had touched, how much her spirit had taught him about what really mattered in life. At the exact moment that Simeon pressed the button to capture the image, a single tear fell from Declan's eye and landed on the screen of the phone, creating a small droplet that caught the light from the bedside lamp. It was as if the universe itself was marking this moment as something sacred, something that deserved to be remembered not just by those present, but by anyone who would ever see the resulting photograph. The camera captured everything in that single frame. Travis, with his eyes closed, holding Amaris with infinite tenderness, her small form nestled against him with perfect trust, the blue ribbon around his wrist that represented their promise to each other, and in the background, her parents with faces that showed both heartbreak and overwhelming love. But perhaps most remarkably, the image captured something intangible, the presence of hope in the midst of loss, the beauty of human connection in the face of ultimate separation. As soon as the shutter clicked, Amaris seemed to release the last of her conscious energy. Her breathing became even more shallow, and her eyes fluttered closed as she surrendered to the exhaustion that had been building throughout their visit. But there was a peaceful smile on her face, as if she had accomplished exactly what she had set out to do. Travis continued to hold her for several more minutes, reluctant to break the connection that had formed between them. He could feel the blue ribbon against his wrist, warm from his body heat, a constant reminder of the promise he had made to carry her memory forward into a world that she would never get to see. Simeon looked down at the photograph on his phone screen, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. The image was more beautiful and more heartbreaking than anything he could have imagined. It captured not just a moment in time, but the essence of love itself. The willingness to open one's heart completely to another person, even when that opening inevitably leads to loss. "It's perfect," Rowena whispered, looking over her husband's shoulder at the image. "It's absolutely perfect." Travis finally, gently, released his embrace and stood up slowly. Amaris had fallen into a deep sleep, her breathing steady but weak. He looked down at her peaceful face, knowing that this might be the last time he ever saw her conscious, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the privilege of having shared this experience with her. The blue ribbon around his wrist caught the light as he moved, and he touched it gently with his other hand. This simple piece of fabric had become something precious beyond measure, a tangible connection to one of the most remarkable people he had ever met. He knew that he would keep his promise to her, that every time he looked at the photograph they had just taken, he would tie this ribbon around his wrist and remember the courage and love that had created this moment. But what none of them knew, as they stood in that quiet hospital room savoring the memory of what had just occurred, was that this photograph would not remain a private family treasure. Within hours, it would begin a journey that would carry Amaris's story and her message of hope to millions of people around the world, creating a legacy that would far exceed anything any of them could have imagined. The question that hung unspoken in the air, as Travis prepared to leave and as Amaris slept peacefully in her bed, was whether the world would understand the true meaning behind the image when they saw it. Would they see beyond the surface of a celebrity visiting a sick child to recognize the profound exchange of love and promise that had actually taken place? The photograph should have remained private, a precious family memory shared only among those who understood its true significance. Simeon and Rowena had taken it for themselves, for the days when they would need to remember their daughter's courage, and the moment when a stranger had shown her such extraordinary kindness. They had no intention of sharing something so intimate with the world, but life has a way of making decisions for us, and sometimes the most important stories are the ones that refuse to stay hidden. Late that evening, as Amaris slept peacefully in her hospital bed, Declan was finishing his shift when he received a call from his sister in another state. She was going through her own difficult time, a divorce that was tearing her family apart, and she needed someone to remind her that goodness still existed in the world. Without thinking about the privacy implications, Declan shared the story of what he had witnessed that afternoon. "You should have seen it," he told her, his voice still thick with emotion hours after the fact. This famous athlete came to visit a dying little girl, and instead of just signing an autograph and leaving, he spent real time with her. She asked him to make a promise. You could see that he meant it, that it wasn't just something saying or feel better. His sister was so moved by the story that she shared it with her best friend, who worked as a nurse at a children's hospital in California. That friend shared it with her supervisor, who had connections in the media, and like ripples spreading across a pond, the story began to find its way into the world through the network of people who work with sick children and understand the power of hope. The photograph first appeared on social media at 11:47 p.m., posted by someone who had heard the story third-hand and felt compelled to share it with a simple caption. She asked him to make a promise. Some promises are too important to break. Within the first hour, the image had been shared 47 times. By morning, that number had grown to several thousand. By the end of the week, it had been seen by millions of people around the world, each viewer adding their own interpretation to what they were witnessing. Most people saw exactly what the image appeared to show: a famous athlete taking time to bring joy to a terminally ill child. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, praising Travis for his compassion and expressing sympathy for Amaris and her family. But a few viewers seemed to sense that there was more to the story, something deeper happening beneath the surface of the obvious narrative. One comment, posted by a woman who had lost her own daughter to cancer, read, "There's something in his face that tells me this wasn't just a photo op. This looks like a man who just received something precious, not someone who's just giving it." Another observer noted, "Look at his wrist. There's something blue tied around it. That wasn't there in other photos of him. What is that? And why is it important enough for him to wear it during such an important moment?" But perhaps the most perceptive comment came from a hospital chaplain who wrote, "I've seen thousands of deathbed visits, and this doesn't look like someone saying goodbye. "This looks like someone making a promise. I wonder what she asked him to remember." Travis saw the photograph circulating online 3 days after it was taken when his publicist called to ask if he wanted to make a statement about his hospital visit. He was initially surprised that something so private had become public, but as he read through the comments and saw how many people had been touched by Amaris's story, he realized that perhaps this was exactly what she would have wanted. He looked down at his wrist, where the blue ribbon still remained tied exactly as she had requested. He had kept his promise faithfully, retying the ribbon each morning and wearing it whenever he looked at the photograph. It had become a ritual that connected him to her memory and reminded him of the lesson she had taught him about the power of human connection. Rather than issue a standard public relations statement, Travis decided to share the real story behind the photograph. In a heartfelt social media post, he wrote about Amaris's courage, about the promise she had asked him to make, and about the blue ribbon that had once been part of her favorite dress. He explained that the photograph captured not just a moment of celebrity charity, but an exchange of love that had changed his life forever. "Some promises don't show up in pictures," he wrote, "but pictures exist because of them. Amaris taught me that the connections we make with each other are the only things that really matter, and that love doesn't end just because someone's physical presence does. Every time I look at this ribbon, I remember her smile and her courage, and I try to live up to the example she set." The response to his post was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of people shared their own story of loss and hope, of promises made and kept, of the ways that brief encounters with extraordinary people had changed their lives. The photograph became something larger than itself, a symbol of the possibility for grace and connection, even in the darkest circumstances. Parents of other terminally ill children reached out to thank Travis for showing the world what their own children's courage looked like. Medical professionals shared stories of the remarkable strength they witnessed every day in their pediatric ward, and countless ordinary people wrote to say that Amaris's story had inspired them to reach out to someone they loved, to make their own promise that would outlast their physical presence in the world. 6 months later, Travis established the Amaris Promise Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of children with terminal illnesses and ensuring that every child who wanted to make a meaningful connection in their final days would have that opportunity. The foundation's logo featured a simple blue ribbon, and its mission statement began with the words that had become Travis's guiding principle. "Some promises don't appear in the photo, but the photo exists because of them." The photograph continued to circulate, touching new lives with each viewing. It appeared in medical journals as an example of the healing power of human connection. It was featured in articles about the importance of celebrity role models who understand their responsibility to use their platform for good. And it became a touchstone for families facing similar challenges, proof that even in the midst of unimaginable loss, moments of perfect love and understanding were possible. But for Travis, the most important audience for the photograph would always be an audience of one. Every night before he went to sleep, he looked at the image on his phone, retied the blue ribbon around his wrist, and whispered a quiet thank you to the brave little girl who had taught him that the most valuable promises are the ones we make, not with our words, but with our hearts. The blue ribbon had faded slightly over the months, its bright azure color softening to a gentler shade that seemed to hold all the tenderness of their brief but profound encounter. Travis had been offered replacement ribbons by well-meaning friends who worried about the fabric wearing out, but he always declined. This ribbon, with its frayed edges and softened color, was the exact one that Amaris had kept beneath her pillow, the one that had once been part of a dress she wore when she was healthy and whole. Its imperfections made it precious beyond measure. On the anniversary of their meeting, Travis returned to the hospital where they had met. He brought with him dozens of blue ribbons and copies of their photograph, which he shared with other families facing similar challenges. He told Amaris's story to anyone who would listen, ensuring that her message of hope and connection would continue to spread long after the viral moment had faded from public attention. Declan, who had facilitated their original meeting, was there to greet him. The head nurse had become something of a guardian of Amaris's legacy, making sure that new staff members understood the significance of the small memorial that had been placed in the hospital's chapel. It featured their photograph alongside the words that had become Amaris's lasting gift to the world. Even when people can't be together anymore, they can still be connected by the promises they make to each other. She would be so proud, Declan told Travis as they stood together looking at the memorial. She would be amazed to know how many lives she's touched, how many people have been inspired by her courage. Travis nodded, touching the blue ribbon on his wrist. She knew, he said quietly. Somehow, I think she always knew that her story was bigger than just the two of us. She was teaching me something that she wanted me to share with the world. As he left the hospital that day, Travis carried with him the same sense of purpose that had sustained him throughout the years since Amaris's death. The photograph had become more than a memory. It had become a mission. Every time someone saw it and understood its deeper meaning, every time it inspired someone to make their own meaningful connection, Amaris's promise was being fulfilled. The blue ribbon around his wrist had become his most treasured possession, more valuable than any championship ring or trophy he had ever earned. It was proof that some victories have nothing to do with scoreboards or statistics, and everything to do with the courage to open your heart to another person's pain and joy. And so the photograph continued to exist in the world, carrying with it a promise that transcended the boundaries between life and death, between celebrity and ordinary person, between one moment in time and eternal love. It stood as testament to the truth that Amaris had understood with the wisdom of someone far beyond her years, that the connections we make with each other are the only things that really last, and that sometimes the most important promises are the ones that live not in our word, but in our willingness to remember and honor the people who have touched our lives. The last image of Amaris Lote with Travis Kelce would continue to circulate for years to come, but those who understood its true meaning would always know that it was never really about the celebrity or the sick child or the viral moment. It was about the blue ribbon, about the promise, and about the eternal truth that love, once given freely, can never truly be taken away. Some promises don't appear in the photo, but the photo exists because of them.